Good morning, Mr. Jason Miller. Welcome to our new Federal State of China, the second anniversary ceremony here. How are you feeling today?
Very good. This is a very important day in history for human rights, for free speech, for the movement of the free people of China. And it's a day that is very much worth remembering and taking hold and applying to the lessons that we are learning today.
Yeah, so we just heard Mr. Steve Bannon and Miles Guo. 5 years ago, Mr. Miles Guo started this new federal whistleblower movement, and 2 years ago, Steve Bannon co-founded the new federal state of China with Miles Guo. So in the past years, the whistleblowers was exposed the evil nature of the CCP. Unfortunately, the mainstream media was censored the true voice. And you are the CEO at Gather. Since last year, Gather platform launched, we could finally speak freely again. So what do you think the historical mission Gather is carrying?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And when we take a look at 1989 was a great year for cultural change around the world. Here in the United States, President Reagan handed over the reins to President H.W. Bush. The Game Boy was introduced for the first time. The Pistons beat the Lakers and dashed hopes of a three-peat. In Central and Eastern Europe, there was also cultural change. We saw Poland and Hungary and Romania and Czechoslovakia move towards free and democratic reforms. And with the exception of Romania, without a shot being fired. Even later in 1989, the Cold War ended after the Malta Conference, which is, again, a great watershed moment in global history. But on the other side of the planet, in June of 1989, 33 years ago, it was a much different story than the United States or in Europe. And that spring, student protesters had started gathering in Beijing. And to understand exactly why we're in the situation we are today with the CCP, we have to go back to that day on June 4th, 1989. And on that day, the CCP sent in the military to break up unarmed, peaceful student protesters. And what occurred was one of the worst massacres in human history. Over 3,000, some have said maybe as many as 10,000 people were innocent people were mercilessly killed. And everyone, of course, remembers the images of Tank Man standing in front of the column of tanks in protest about what was happening. And to understand that the CCP would so just callously and mercilessly kill people like that, that's what puts things in perspective about how they can go and shut down 20 million people in Shanghai, how they can lie to the world about COVID, how they can enslave the Uyghurs, how they can commit cultural genocide to the people of Tibet, how they can crush the student protesters in Hong Kong, and ultimately, as we look ahead, how they can topple the world economy, how they can overtake the island nation, the free and independent people of Taiwan. And it shows that we're on a collision course with the CCP. And this is why we must stand up and take down the CCP. They're never going to change. They're never going to moderate their ways. They're always going to be just as merciless and just as callous as they were to the 3,000 or maybe even 10,000 people that they killed on June 4th, 1989.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Jason Miller. And you mentioned so many atrocities done by the Chinese Communist Party, but so far the world has not taken the Chinese Communist Party accountable. What do you think is the reason?
Well, it ultimately comes down to money, and it comes down to greed from the corporate and global elitists. And in fact, after the 1989 massacre in Tiananmen Square, the very fact that they would move towards trade normalization and they'd bring them into the WTO and everything else just shows how much that these corporate and political leaders are willing to sell out not just the Chinese people, but the people of America and all these other countries in order to make additional money. It all comes down to money.
It's amazing. And, you are the CEO of Gather. And you carrying such a mission to help the Chinese people using your platform to expose the evil nature of the Chinese Communist Party. And what is your impression of Chinese and Chinese people?
Well, you have to separate very clearly the Chinese people from the CCP. The CCP only represents a small fraction of the actual people of China, and this is a thuggish, mob-like dictatorship. This is not about socialisms or some aspect of trying to have everybody be equal. This is essentially like a mob family, where if you're a member of the party, you can get rich, you can live one lifestyle. But it all comes down to free speech, and that's why we launched Getter. In fact, our very logo, the torch, is about bringing freedom and democracy to places where it doesn't exist, about bringing lightness to where it is currently dark. And this is our mission with Getter, to make sure that free speech is always protected. This is, again, the key. If we go back to what happened in Tiananmen Square, it was all about free speech. And rather than, whereas we saw free speech lead to tremendous cultural change in the United States and in Europe, and Tiananmen Square in Beijing led to thousands of people being killed. We can never lose that free speech.
Yes, because of the Gather platform, and we Chinese could speak, delivering the message to the world and let them know what is happening in China. And also, we have seen in the Ukraine frontline, the rescue mission, we are the only group that we could, to take our phone and immediately reporting what is happening now. And what do you think Gather is playing?
Well, Getter is going to play a critical role, not just in the future of free speech, but also in toppling the CCP. And it's going to be from free speech platforms such as Getter that we can get the message out, that we can get the word out. This is absolutely critical. We've already seen where the Twitters and Facebooks of the world will easily fall in line with the CCP and censor political or independent thought. And of course, TikTok, as we know, is already controlled by the CCP. And so Getter will be playing a pivotal role in this.
Okay, and we heard Gather is going to launch a Gather Pay soon.
Yes, so actually we just activated Getter Vision, which is on everybody's phones now. So we're up to 5.5 million users around the globe. But if you go to your phone, the short video, our competitor to TikTok and Instagram Reels, except in our case, the data does not get sent to the CCP. But soon we'll launch Getter Pay, which will allow people to have the financial freedom, control their financial destiny, and not be enslaved by the big banks. And so this is something we'll have a 2-coin crypto ecosystem, and we'll start off this summer as we start entering into that. It's going to be very exciting.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jason Miller.
Thank you.
Thank you for the interview today.